Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to go and make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimas.
And I'm Brian Rohenbacher, and this is the television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And if you'd like to support resources like this show, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And our hope is that this show will inspire you to step into conversations about your faith with confidence and compassion.
And as you're watching the show today, be sure to get connected with us on social media. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear from you.
And as a reminder, the podcast version of 2819 is now available on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. You can listen to us while on the go if you're more of an audio person than visual. So make sure you check that out. Just search for Reasons to Believe podcast.
All right, let's get started. We're going to do a quick rundown of today's show. We'll hear a clip from Anjeanette Roberts talk, Why Would a Good God Create Viruses? That's coming up in our Nexus segment.
And in Culture Talk, Sandra will catch up with Kathy Ross to discuss how we can avoid using overly Christian language, also known as Christianese.
Yep. Then in our Give and Take segment, Jeff will talk with Michael Guillen about what he considers to be the strongest evidence for the Christian faith.
And have you heard of RTB's student mentoring program called The Lab? Monica and Krista will tell you all about it in our RTB News segment, so make sure you stick around for that.
But first up is RTB 101. Krista will talk with Hugh Ross about how a loving God could send people to hell, or H-E double bendy straws, as some might call it. Let's check that out.
Now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help equip you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. And I'm here once again with my colleague and minister of the gospel, Dr. Hugh Ross. And you know, Hugh, I think that one of the most common questions I run into is almost the question I'm the most afraid of when I talk to my non-Christian friends. And that even many children, I think, struggle with, and they ask their parents a lot, maybe there's a parent watching this right now, is a question of how could a loving God send people to hell? So help us think this through a little bit.
Well, it's a very common question, not just asked by children, by adults. And I think every believer needs to be ready to answer that question because it inevitably will come up. And my response has always been, God will send you to the place of your choice. If you want to spend the rest of eternity in a relationship with God, He's got a place for you. If you want nothing to do with God, He's got another place for you. I think what gets people, though, is this idea that that other place is a place of torture that lasts for eternity. But I explain to people that's not the word the Bible uses. It's translated torment. But if you actually look up the Greek word, it's referring to that which restrains. And that which restrains can be unpleasant, but it's designed to restrain the individual from committing more evil than he otherwise would. And notice what it says in Revelation 20. Different levels of restraint depending on their capacity to commit evil. And so God shows His love even to the inhabitants of hell, and He sets up different levels of restraint to prevent those individuals from making hell otherwise a much worse place.
So give me kind of a picture here of what we're talking about. Like, how does this cash out? Because I'm not totally clear on the importance of this restraint idea.
Well, you know, people are different. So some people have a greater propensity for evil acts than others. And God is basically saying those individuals are going to experience more restraint than those who don't have that degree of capacity. So different levels of restraint depending on the evil they've committed here and their capacity to commit additional evil. Because what God does with the inhabitants of hell, He says, I'm giving you what you want. You want to be free from me. You want nothing to do with me. That includes my taking away Holy Spirit restraint. And I think what we fail to realize in this life, every individual is being restrained to some degree by God's Holy Spirit. But in hell, God takes away that Holy Spirit restraint, but He imposes a different kind of restraint to prevent hell from being a worse place, basically giving people exactly what they want. I want nothing to do with God for the rest of eternity, so this is the place that's best for you.
So it sounds like your answer is mostly based on the idea of free will.
Right.
That God gives us.
He's not going to force you to go to a place you don't want to go. And there are individuals who don't want to go to heaven. I mean, they think they want to go to heaven when they realize it's a place where I have to submit to the authority of God for the rest of eternity, where I have to be in a personal relationship with that God for the rest of eternity. And that's the way heaven's like. I want nothing to do with it. God says, fine, I got another place for you.
But many of my non-Christian friends have a concept of hell that it's just going to be like a eternal party. You know, that even sounds better than being in heaven with the Father.
Yeah, I've heard that. Hell's a place where I can play poker with my friends for the rest of eternity and have a great time. What they're not taking into account, God removes His Holy Spirit restraint. So your friends that you think you're going to be spending eternity with, having fun, they're not going to be the same as they are here on earth, because God is giving them what they want. And that will make hell a lot worse. And so God imposes this restraint to keep things in check.
Do you find when you give this answer to non-Christians that this helps continue to push the conversation forward?
It does. It usually opens up additional conversation. And really the whole point is they can't see how an all-powerful, all-loving God would choose to torture people for all of eternity. So just getting the word torture out and saying this actually is an expression of love to those inhabitants, given the decision they've made with their own free will. God is honoring their free will decision, saying based on that, this is the best situation I can set up for you.
It's a very tough issue. I really appreciate kind of your veteran voice as an evangelist talking to non-Christians about this issue. It's tough, but I'm going to try this next time I'm in a conversation with a non-believer. And I want to encourage all of you, if you'd like to read more about Dr. Ross's thoughts about hell, to check out his book, Beyond the Cosmos. He has an entire chapter in there exploring hell from the perspective of the love of God. So you can get that through our web store. Thanks for watching.
Why would a good God create viruses? Now, that's not a bad question. In fact, that's a great question, because viruses historically were discovered because they're associated with disease. Like the first virus that was discovered, the tobacco mosaic virus, which infects tobacco plants and other crops. And then there are other viruses that can wipe out entire flocks of birds, like foulpox virus or bird influenza virus. Then there's viruses that infect animals, like distemper and rabies. And Ebola virus killed over 11,000 people with a mortality rate of 40%. So it didn't take long, immersed in my studies of human pathogens and the diseases that the viruses caused, to come to the conclusion that if viruses fit into the Christian narrative, that they must be associated with the fall because of the disease that they caused, because of the suffering that they caused. And perhaps they're associated with the fall as just a byproduct of the curse. Or perhaps they're associated with lives that are unsustained by or denied access to the tree of life, which was a product of the curse. So maybe viruses are just part of the normal decay that lead to disease when we're denied access to that sustaining life that happened as a result of the fall. Okay, well, so the problem with answers is I always have more questions. So although this answer wasn't bad and it wasn't unreasonable, I also didn't find it deeply satisfying. And so these questions didn't stop hounding me, even though I had an answer. But on the heels of that answer, if viruses are associated with the fall, my question now became, well, what is my response and my role as somebody studying viruses in light of this? I began to think of my studies and my activities and my future activities of doing virus research as ways of counteracting aspects of the fall. If I could learn about viruses and help develop antivirals or things that could prevent viral infections, then perhaps my work could be a type of redemptive work.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Kathy Ross. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're a player with words. You love to not only write really well, but edit a lot of Hugh's books.
Thank you. I love words. I used to sit in the in the library at USC and read the dictionary. And people thought, strange, and they're right.
Well, I'm glad you're using that strangeness to help our words here at RTV. And speaking of words, recently I saw some books at a Christian bookstore, and it made me think how we use words. The titles had things like reaching the lost or the unsaved, the unbeliever. And I thought, you know what? This is common language that we use, but how would a person who isn't a Christ believer, how would they respond? So let's talk about these words.
Think about sitting next to someone on an airplane and you're reading a book about reaching the lost, and this person is not a follower of Christ. You see, the problem I have with that, and I think Sharon Ellison points this out really well in her book called Taking the War Out of Your Words. Certain words trigger an immediate emotional reaction. I mean, it's almost so fast that you're not aware of it, but they trigger something in the deep part of your brain, it's the limbic system, that puts you on the defensive. It gets emotions running, and it actually clouds the capacity to think and communicate calmly. The last thing we want to do when we're trying to have a conversation about spiritual truth is to trigger someone and waste a whole bunch of time and energy dealing with trying to get off the defensive place and get to a comfortable conversation place.
Right, and that's a really good point, because I think sometimes there can be some pushback that, well, I don't want to be, censoring myself. People are too sensitive. But why do we want to do that? What are some tips that you would even give to encourage people to say maybe not this word, but that word, so that we can not waste so much time when we're trying to share the gospel, but we can actually start to have an impact in these conversations?
Well, being mindful of the other person, or just the setting that we're in, that can be helpful. Depending on where you are, you can be a little more alert sometimes. But basically, think in positive terms. I think the more positive we can be in describing people as, say, truth seekers or not yet followers. I like the idea of calling people truth seekers, or people with doubts, people with questions, questioners, or curious people. They haven't yet drawn their conclusions. They haven't yet come to that place of faith. But let's refer to them as much as possible in positive terms, and not try to make it sound like there are insiders and outsiders. I think I like to be thoughtful about insider language versus outsider language. So if we can just be mindful of that, I think we'll do so much better.
Excellent advice, Kathy. Can you name the book again?
Yes, it's called Taking the War Out of Our Words by Sharon Ellison. And it's a helpful book for even interrelational communications anywhere, anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm excited because it sounds like a really good book. I definitely want to check it out. And those of you watching, I really hope that this conversation will help encourage you to just think about the language that you're using in conversations and maybe change them up a little bit so that you can make a deeper impact when sharing your faith.
Hello, Jeff Zwarick again here with Give and Take, where we look at scientific issues to equip you to be more confident in sharing your faith. Today we're joined by Michael Guillen, and we're just going to explore what a fellow scientist thinks is the strongest evidence for the truth of Christianity. Michael, it's good to have you here today.
Hey, Jeff, it's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I enjoy being joined here by another physicist.
Right.
You're theoretical, I'm experimental.
So together we make a full set,
there
right?
We go. There we go.
Like
there
bookends.
You're a best-selling author and has done stuff with Fox News. And just kind of really want to know, as a scientist and someone who interacts with these issues, what do you think is the strongest evidence for the truth of Christianity?
Boy, you ask the big questions, don't you?
We try.
But you know what? Let me answer it this way, Jeff, in all sincerity. When I was a grad student at Cornell, where I got my PhD in math, physics, and astronomy, I was pretty much a scientific monk. So God and all that other stuff just wasn't part of my life. I didn't really care about it. I cared only about becoming a scientist. But at some point, I asked myself the question, where did this incredible universe that I'm studying come from? I mean, how did it come to be? And I knew, of course, that science offered the answer that, well, it was pretty random. I mean, you can elaborate on that, but that's really what it boils down to. And I didn't find that intellectually satisfying. Again, I wasn't a religious person, a spiritual. I just, as an intellectual, I just didn't find that answer very convincing. And so I set about to try to find other answers. And eventually, after a long haul of exploring other religions, I cracked open the Bible. And especially when I started reading the New Testament, and this is really the way I'm answering your question, is that when I read the New Testament, it struck me as being very different from any other sacred literature.
In what ways did you find it most different?
Okay, one of the things was I loved the kind of very straightforward narrative. There wasn't a lot of embellishment. There weren't a lot of kind of literary curly cues, as I like to say it. It was just like, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this person said this, and then this happened. And that appealed to me both as a scientist and as a reporter. I thought, okay, this is a horse of a different color. And then the other thing that struck me was this character Jesus. The way he spoke was very kind of non-intuitive, counter-logical. When he would say things like, the first shall be last, and if somebody, asks you to do something for them, do that and then some, and love your enemies. And it was like, whoa, you're turning logic on its head. And the reason that was significant to me, Jeff, is because, it rang very much like what I was studying in quantum mechanics, which is equally kind of very counterintuitive and extra logical. The idea that something can be a particle and a wave at the same time, which seemed very contradictory, almost the same, on the same level as saying somebody who's first shall be last. And then also, the notion that a particle is not in just one place, it's kind of everywhere at once and can materialize depending on the experiment you do, on and on and on. So right off the bat, my impression of the New Testament was this was a document that needed to be taken seriously because it was quantitatively and qualitatively very different than any other sacred religion, any other sacred literature that I had read from Muslims, from Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth.
It sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that there was something about reading the Bible that intrigued you to study more deeply, in some sense, that as you're looking at quantum mechanics, where it's saying this and this, and you have to explore, what does that mean? It's not surfacely easy to understand, but as you dig in, there's a depth to it. Is that
that's actually a good way to put it. That this is a document, and I've discovered this even years subsequently. That even now, when I read the Bible, after this many years of reading it, I still find new meaning in it. I'm not reading meaning into it. It's that the meaning is just inherent in the document. And it's very much like science, as you know, as a scientist yourself, that when you're studying nature, there are layers of reality. And it's like, let's take particle physics, which was my first love. You look at an atom and you think, okay, well, the atom is made up of protons and neutrons in the nucleus, electrons. Well, that's a superficial revelation, and that itself is fantastic, right? The Greeks tried to understand what atoms were made of. So just the idea that we could go that far in understanding atoms was great. But you and I both know that was just the tip of the iceberg. Then you start saying, well, but protons and neutrons are themselves made up of other particles, quarks and gluons and other stuff like that. And then it just gets really complicated. So even in science, like with the Bible, there are levels of meaning. And the more you study it, the deeper you get into it. It's not, like you say, it's not just superficial. But the bottom line, in answer to that really great question, was, so as I looked more and more deeply into the New Testament, I found that there were incredible parallels between the truths being espoused by science that I love so much and the truths being espoused by the Bible itself. And I even ended up writing a book about it called Amazing Truths, How Science and the Bible Agree, just to document just how similar, I would even dare say identical, the scientific truths are with the biblical truths. So, and then add to that as you look, as you kind of kind of break open this hypothesis that it all happened by accident, whether it was the Big Bang or whatever, some variety of that, or whatever you want to talk about it, the quantum vacuum, you begin to realize as a scientist how really far-fetched that is. I mean, you know, somebody like many scientists have done calculations. Fred Hoyle, for one, who I got to know at Cornell, did a fantastic calculation that showed that the probability of creating a protein molecule, just a protein molecule, mind you, from scratch would take longer than the age of the universe. So when you start looking at calculations like that, again, forget the Bible, forget all that stuff, but just look at it from the point of view of a scientist and look at it in a very hard-nosed way. I began to realize that this hypothesis that it all happened by accident is just not credible.
You know, I find that a remarkable and actually very encouraging reality is that there's a depth to the Bible and there's a depth to creation that as we study them, we're never going to run out of what we learn. But yet we find a harmony between the two, and that allows us to share the truth in confidence, to spread the gospel, to share the truth and let people interact with that, and so that God can work in their hearts and bring them. We don't have to have all the answers, but we can be excited about the exploration, and that gives us confidence to go share the gospel.
Hey, I'm Monica Jones, and today I'm talking to Krista Bontrager. She is RTB's Scholar Community Program Director, long title.
Very long.
And one of the masterminds behind the lab. So we are talking about the lab that is happening in a few weeks, believe it or not. Krista, who is the lab designed for?
Well, yeah, it is happening in a few weeks. The time is running out, but we'll tell people how they can sign up at the end of the segment. But yeah, who is it for? Great question. It is for students like college age, as long as you haven't started graduate school yet. We even admit a few high schoolers if they really know what they want to do and what they want to go into. And it's for those students who are interested in going into science as a profession. And science can even mean like mathematics, engineering, a high-tech industry. We even had a white hat hacker join us at one of them.
Right.
So anything that where people are really interested in high-tech and engineering and science.
Okay. So what does that time frame for them look like? What are they going to be learning? What are they going to do while they're here?
Sure. It's a great opportunity for 3 days of concentrated discussions with the students and getting them engaged with the RTB scholars and our mentors, people that are working professionals in science to try to help the students catch a vision of what their future could be like, what their voice and their contribution might be in the future to the scientific endeavor.
That's awesome. And you're going to be speaking, right?
I am one of the speakers, and I was more involved in the past in kind of building the event, but now that's all been handed off to a great team, and they're going to have a fabulous time. In fact, I should mention that the field trip this year is to go to the Griffith Observatory, very historic place here in Los Angeles, and go on a self-guided tour and then go to the planetarium.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was there last year and it's really, really fun. So Krista, when is the lab happening?
Yeah, it's June 21st to the 23rd. That's a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Oh, that's awesome. Krista, thank you for being with me. Well, if you or someone you know might be interested in joining the lab, go to reasons.org/the-lab. The last day to register is June 15th, so please don't wait. We really hope to see you there. See you later.
That about does it for us. Thanks for joining us this week on 2819.
And we hope that our discussions today will really equip you to share your faith.
As a reminder, this show is made possible through the support of Reasons to Believe donors. If you feel led to support resources like this, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And until next time, you can check us out at reasons.org. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show. Let us know where you're watching.
See you next week.